Sikkim is included according to both the landlord and the tenant.
Just what we learned today, Be'ez Hashem, I think is the most important point, that both the tenant and the landlord have certain rights, and each could argue convincingly, and that's the recipe for major machlokes. The only way it's going to work, it's only shaykh to work, if each one works together, understands the other person's perspective, the other person's problem, the other person's needs. But it's inevitable that things come up that just, it has to work out only if we follow the Darchanayim of Torah. But basically, Halacha, the tenant has definite rights. You can't evict the tenant, even if the landlord needs it for his own living. You can't, the landlord cannot renovate against the will of the tenant, even though it's benefiting the tenant, but he doesn't want the noise. You can't subject him to that noise. We asked the tenant to allow the landlord access to the apartment to renovate, but basically the tenant has these undeniable rights. What's also true, the landlord owns the house. He's the muhzik l'halacha when there's a suffix. If there's an aveda found in the apartment or in the chutz of the apartment, it belongs to the balabas. Subletting the apartment depends on different variables, but basically we see both rights. The landlord could object to the tenant taking in rowdy, loud tenants, or a bigger family than he had originally. But basically, the tenant is allowed to sublet, to rent to someone else, and profit even more than he's paying rent, because the schiris belongs to him. So both have rights. The only thing is, when they clash, the ikka yisoid is to try to work together, understand the other person, see from his perspective, and then hopefully Shalom v'shalva will reign. The basic rule that any Maisa Uman that's Ikka Gadol Yeshivas Habatim is the responsibility of the landlord to take care before the tenant moves in. Even if he saw it and didn't speak up, but it's understood that you have to do the basic conditions for normal living. Le'idach, if the tenant signed to take the apartment as is, so that's his decision, and that's really what he's getting, as is, with nothing else. A big factor is minig hamakom, which could even vary from state to state. So New York and New Jersey could have sometimes different rules and regulations. But basically, a phone line is still, I think, considered a basic need, which is the responsibility of the landlord. Painting and carpeting depends on the condition of the paint or carpet. The makkah, a window guard, are the responsibility of the landlord. Renovations that the tenant wants to do, he has to ask permission from the landlord, because he can't be mazik the tenant, the landlord's house. Even though he has living rights, but he can't do major repairs without asking permission. The tenant, as we said, could invest money, and when he leaves, if the balabas admits that he has anah, then he could require the balabas to pay his fair share as a din of yoyret shaloi b'rishus. The balabas could say, take it with you, and that's shaykh, of course, a light fixture. But carpeting and custom-made shades, if the landlord admits that he has a benefit, then he has to pay midin yoyred. The basic halacha is follow minig hamakom when there's no specific halacha. And regarding repairs, the minig hamakom and the halacha both seem to point in the direction that it's the responsibility of the landlord to make all necessary repairs, even if something that you could say mazloi gorim, but that's the responsibility of the landlord. If there's neglect mitzad the tenant, then he has to either fix it, but he can't require the balabas to pay. That's unfair. But basic repairs is the responsibility of the landlord. He has to provide a dwelling that's comfortable when he moves in and continues to be livable. When the tenant could do it himself, again, putting out mice traps and changing light bulbs and bringing the garbage and shoveling when the landlord is not living on the premises, that we expect the tenant to do. But the extermination costs and any ma'isa uman is responsibility of the landlord. The basic maintenance, we could say, if the house is not broken, again, keeping the hall clean and when the landlord's not living there, of course, and other things is responsibility of the tenant, taking out the garbage, shoveling when the landlord is not on the premises. Unless it's a multi-dwelling, then he has to appoint someone to He has to pay someone to do it instead of the landlord. A tenant should not ruin the ground by sprinkling this devastating salt that does too good of a job. That's mazik b'shus chaverei. If you have to cut down a tree for the sukkah and he has rights to put the sukkah there, then it's probably a ma'isa uman that the landlord should be doing. If it's a suffix, who has to pay? That's a very tricky question. You have to really go to the entire because it's hard to know who is the muhsik in that particular shayla. Normal wear and tear is not a chiyuv. It's normal wear and tear, and there's no responsibility, even if you agreed to return the apartment as is. Abuse is not wear and tear, that's hezek. And abuse has to be held accountable. A child who's mazik mi'ikid din is not chayiv to pay. There's a question when he gets older, and he was old enough to understand when he did it, that he shouldn't be doing it. Some say he has to pay when he gets older, but basically a young child does hezek, there's no chayiv on the child or the father, because shmira by karkoyes don't exist mitzad halacha. Of course, the tenant has to watch the apartment carefully. That's part of the halach sani l'chabach leisavid, but there's no chiyuv payment because karka on the smayit unless he pledged to return the apartment as it was. That overrides any patur. Movable items, there is a chiyuv shmira and chiyuv tashluman on the father if he was negligent in shmira. Bungalows and multi-dwellings are things that basically are the same, but you have to make sure that it works because there are more people involved. The most important thing, as we said, is both have rights, and the shalom account will go and do a lot to maintain shalom, and mavater is something that's really the key to success in these inyanim. Let's hope for easy come, easy go.